The moment my millionaire son embraced me at his Christmas celebration and whispered, "Hope you're enjoying that $5,000 monthly allowance, Mom," my entire world shifted on its axis. The blood drained from my face as I stammered back, "Sweetheart, I'm juggling 2 jobs just to survive." That's when my daughter-in-law began choking on her appetizer, and everything unraveled. My name is Helen, and at 65, I believed I had weathered every storm life could unleash. I was mistaken. Nothing could have prepared me for the revelation that would shatter my understanding of family, trust, and the 3 years I'd spent believing my own son had abandoned me. The holiday gathering at Daniel and Claudia's mansion was exactly what I'd anticipated: lavish, impersonal, and orchestrated to dazzle strangers I'd never encounter again. Their residence resembled something from an upscale magazine spread, complete with gleaming marble surfaces and cascading crystal fixtures. I found myself relegated to a corner of their enormous sitting room, wearing my finest outfit, a navy dress purchased on markdown 3 years prior, feeling utterly displaced among the designer gowns and tailored suits surrounding me. My feet ached terribly. I just completed an 8-hour shift at the supermarket where I worked the register, and before that, I'd spent my morning sanitizing office buildings downtown. At my age, maintaining 2 employment positions wasn't simple, but it remained my only path to financial survival. My Social Security benefits barely handled my rent, leaving little for groceries and prescriptions. Daniel commanded attention from across the room, every inch the triumphant technology executive he'd become. Tall, self-assured, dressed in attire that likely exceeded my 2-month earnings. He was entertaining business colleagues, gesturing with a crystal tumbler containing what I recognized as premium whiskey. Despite everything, my heart swelled with maternal pride. He'd worked tirelessly to reach his current position, and I'd sacrificed everything to ensure his success. Claudia glided between guest clusters as though she ruled the universe. She'd always been stunning blonde, immaculately assembled, possessing the confidence that emerges from never experiencing financial anxiety. Yet something frigid lurked behind her emerald eyes whenever she glanced my way, something that made me feel insignificant and unwelcome. I was reaching for a small hors d'oeuvre when Daniel approached. The alcohol's effect was evident in his slightly flushed complexion and overly confident movements. "Mother," he said, draping his arm around my shoulders in what appeared affectionate but felt somehow rehearsed. "You look wonderful tonight, truly wonderful." "Thank you, darling," I responded, attempting to ignore his forced smile. "This is a beautiful party. You and Claudia have surpassed yourselves." He nodded, but his eyes held that detached quality I'd grown familiar with over recent years, as though he was performing the role of a devoted son rather than genuinely being one. "I'm pleased you're here," he continued. Then his tone shifted to something I'd never heard before: casual, almost mocking. "Enjoying that $5,000 monthly, Mom? Really living the good life, I hope." The word struck me like a physical assault. I felt my knees nearly buckle as blood rushed from my face. 5,000? What was he referring to? "Honey," I whispered, my voice barely audible above the party conversation. "What 5,000? Daniel's expression transformed from casual confidence to bewilderment. "The money I transfer monthly. The 5,000 I've been sending to your account for 3 years. I gripped his arm, my heart pounding so violently I thought it might explode. "Daniel, I work 2 jobs. I clean offices at 6 in the morning and cashier at the grocery until 8 at night. I haven't received any money from you." The surrounding laughter seemed to amplify, becoming more oppressive. Daniel's face turned completely ashen. "That's impossible. I established automatic transfers. Claudia helped organize everything. She explained you were probably too proud to acknowledge it, but that you needed assistance." At her name's mention, we both turned toward Claudia. She stood near the Christmas tree, a shrimp halfway to her mouth, but she wasn't eating. She was staring at us with the expression of someone who'd witnessed a ghost. Our eyes locked across the room, and in that instant I saw the truth. The guilt, panic, and desperate calculation written across her face revealed everything I needed to understand. The color vanished from her carefully applied makeup. Then she began choking, not on the shrimp, but on the realization that her secret had been exposed. The seafood fell from her grasp as she clutched her throat, producing horrible gasping sounds. But I could see it wasn't the food causing her distress. It was fear, pure, concentrated fear. Daniel rushed to her aid, patting her back, asking if she was all right. But Claudia's eyes never left mine. In them I witnessed 3 years of deception, 3 years of stolen funds, 3 years of watching me struggle while she lived luxuriously, funded by what should have been my support. The room felt like it was spinning. Guests began noticing the commotion. Someone suggested calling a physician, but all I could think about was the mortgage payment I'd missed last month, the prescription I couldn't afford to fill, the nights I'd gone to bed hungry because there wasn't enough money for both rent and food. The money, I whispered to Daniel as he continued helping his choking wife. Where did you send it? He looked up at me, his face mixing confusion with growing dread. To your account, the one Claudia established for you. She said it would be easier to manage that way, that you were aging and might have difficulty tracking finances. Claudia had stopped choking, but she continued gasping, still staring at me with those terrified eyes. She knew I understood, and she knew her perfect little world was about to collapse. I felt something cold and solid settle in my chest. Not anger yet, just a terrible crystal-clear comprehension of how completely I'd been betrayed by the two people who should have protected me most. The party continued around us, but everything had changed. The laughter sounded hollow, the lights seemed dimmer, and I realized this beautiful house, this extravagant lifestyle, this perfect Christmas celebration, it had all been constructed, at least partially, on money meant to prevent me from working myself to death at 65. Claudia finally regained her breath, straightening her expensive dress and attempting to compose herself. But her hands trembled, and when she looked at me again, I saw something I'd never seen in her eyes before. She was terrified of me. For the first time in 3 years of struggle and sacrifice, I felt something other than exhaustion and resignation. I felt power. Standing in that opulent living room, watching my daughter-in-law's face flush with guilt and panic, my mind drifted to when Daniel needed me more than anything in the world. Memory can be cruel in how it works in your darkest moments. It reminds you of everything you've lost. I was 32 when my husband Michael died. Heart attack at 35, no warning, no preparation time. One minute he was laughing at Daniel's silly 5-year-old jokes over breakfast. The next he was gone, leaving me with a kindergartner and a mountain of medical debt that insurance barely touched. Those first months after Michael's death were the hardest of my existence. Daniel would wake crying for his daddy every night, and I'd hold him in our tiny apartment, both of us grieving in our own ways. I remember one particular evening when he looked up at me with those big brown eyes, the same eyes that now regarded me with such distance, and asked when Daddy was coming home. "Daddy's not coming home, sweetheart," I'd whispered, my own tears falling onto his small head. "But Mommy's here. Mommy will always be here." And I was there for everything. I worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat, cleaning offices before dawn, waitressing during the day, and taking in sewing at night after Daniel went to bed. My fingers were constantly pricked and swollen from needlework, my back ached from cleaning, and I survived on maybe 4 hours of sleep nightly, but Daniel never knew we were struggling. I ensured that. When he wanted to join Little League, I sold my wedding ring to pay for equipment and fees. When he needed new school clothes, I wore the same 3 outfits for 2 years so he could have what other children had. When he got sick, I worked double shifts to pay for doctor visits because we didn't have health insurance I could afford. I remember the night Daniel came home from school excited about a field trip to the Science Museum. The permission slip required a $25 fee. I looked at that paper and felt my heart break. I had $12 to my name and rent was due in 3 days. That night, after Daniel fell asleep, I walked 6 blocks to the pawn shop and sold my mother's necklace, the only piece of jewelry I had left from my family. The pawnbroker gave me $30 for something probably worth 10 times that, but I didn't argue. Daniel went on that field trip and never knew what it cost me. High school proved even more challenging. Daniel was intelligent, brilliant, actually, but he wanted to take advanced classes requiring expensive textbooks and lab fees. He wanted to join the debate team, computer club, academic decathlon. Each activity meant more money I didn't have, more sacrifices I gladly made. I took out loans I couldn't afford to buy him a decent computer when he showed interest in programming. I worked Christmas Eve and New Year's Eve every year for overtime pay so he could have the calculator needed for advanced math, the chemistry set he wanted for his birthday, the clothes that would help him fit in with classmates whose parents had money. The college years nearly destroyed me. Daniel got into a prestigious university with a partial scholarship, but I still needed $30,000 annually for room, board, and expenses the scholarship didn't cover. I took out a second mortgage on our tiny house, the one I'd finally managed to buy after years of renting, and worked every available hour. I aged 10 years in those 4 years. My hair went completely gray, arthritis set in from all the physical labor, and I developed high blood pressure from constant stress. But every time Daniel called home to share his grades, internships, and future plans, it felt worthwhile. He graduated summa cum laude with a computer science degree, and immediately got a job at a tech startup that would eventually make him a millionaire. I was so proud I cried during his graduation ceremony, not just because he'd succeeded, but because all those years of sacrifice had finally paid off. But something changed after graduation. Daniel moved across the country for his job, and our phone calls became infrequent. He was busy, he said, important meetings, big projects, networking events. I understood he was building his career, just as I'd always wanted. Then he met Claudia. I knew from the moment I met her that she disliked me. It wasn't anything she said directly, Claudia was too sophisticated for that. It was how she looked at my worn clothes, my calloused hands, my small house with its outdated furniture. I could see her calculating my worth and finding me lacking. She started subtly discouraging Daniel from visiting. Suddenly, every time he planned to see me, there was a work emergency or social obligation that Claudia deemed more important. When I called, she would answer with cool politeness that made it clear I was interrupting something more significant. "Daniel's in a meeting," she'd say, or, "He's really overwhelmed with work right now, Helen. Maybe try calling next week." Gradually, the calls stopped altogether. Birthday cards became our only communication. Daniel would send expensive gifts, things I couldn't use or afford to maintain, like silk scarves or electronics I didn't understand, but he stopped asking how I was doing or if I needed anything. I told myself it was natural. Sons grow up, move on, start their own families. I'd done my job raising him, and now he was living his own life. The loneliness was just part of being an older woman whose child had become successful. But standing in their mansion, looking at crystal chandeliers and marble floors, calculating how much their furniture costs compared to my monthly income, I realized something that made my chest tighten with pain I'd never experienced before. All those years of sacrifice, all those nights I went hungry so he could eat, all the times I worked myself to exhaustion so he could have opportunities, none of it had taught him the value of caring for family. Claudia had convinced him that I was somehow beneath them, that my struggles were my own fault, that helping me was charity rather than love. While I'd been working 2 jobs at 65, cleaning toilets and standing on my feet for 14 hours daily, they'd been living in luxury, believing I was receiving money I never saw. The worst part wasn't the betrayal. It was realizing that the little boy I'd held through nightmares, the teenager I'd sacrificed everything for, the young man I'd been so proud of, had become someone who could forget me so completely. As I watched Claudia struggle to regain her composure, still avoiding my eyes, I felt something shift inside me. The grief and confusion remained, but underneath was something harder and colder. For the first time in my life, I wasn't thinking about what was best for Daniel. I was thinking about what was best for me. The days following the Christmas party passed in a blur of uncomfortable silence and difficult conversations. Daniel had insisted on driving me home that night, his face pale and drawn as we sat in his expensive car outside my small duplex. He kept apologizing, his voice shaking with confusion and what I hoped was genuine remorse. "Mom, I swear I had no idea," he'd said, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. "I've been sending that money religiously. Every month, $5,000 transferred to the account Claudia set up." I'd nodded, too exhausted and emotionally drained to say much. "I believe you, sweetheart, but we need to figure out what happened to it." 3 days later, Daniel called asking if he could come over. His voice was different, harder, angrier than I'd heard it in years. When he arrived at my door, He looked like he hadn't slept since the party. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his clothes wrinkled, and there was something in his eyes that reminded me of the little boy who used to run to me when he was hurt. "We need to talk," he said, settling onto my worn couch with a thick folder of papers. "I've been doing some investigating." I poured us both coffee in my mismatched mugs, the only ones I had left after selling most of my good dishes last year to pay for a car repair. Daniel spread papers across my coffee table, pointing to bank statements and transfer records with a trembling finger. "Here," he said, his voice tight with controlled fury. "This is the account I've been sending money to for 3 years. Look at the name on it." I leaned forward, squinting at the small print. The account was indeed in my name, Helen Elizabeth Crawford, but there was something wrong about the address. Instead of my duplex on Maple Street, it listed an address I didn't recognize. "That's not my address," I said slowly. "I've never seen this account before in my life." Daniel's jaw clenched. "The address belongs to a mailbox rental place downtown. Claudia has been intercepting all the statements. She told me she was helping you manage your finances because you were getting older and might have trouble keeping track of things." The words hit me like a slap. She'd said I was getting senile. Not in those words, but... Daniel ran his hands through his hair. "God, Mom, I'm so stupid. She made it sound like she was protecting you. She said you were proud and might be embarrassed about needing help, so it was better if I handled everything through her." I stared at the bank statements, watching the numbers blur as tears filled my eyes. Month after month, $5,000 had been deposited into this fake account. But the withdrawal patterns told a different story entirely. The money wasn't being saved or carefully managed, it was being spent, often within days of each deposit. "What has she been spending it on?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Daniel pulled out another set of papers, credit card statements, and receipts he'd apparently gathered from their home. Spa treatments, designer clothes, girls' trips to wine country with her friends, that expensive gym membership she just had to have, the personal trainer, weekly manicures, shopping sprees. As he read off the list, I felt a strange detachment settle over me. While I'd been skipping meals to afford my arthritis medication, Claudia had been getting $100 facials. While I'd been wearing the same winter coat for 8 years, she'd been buying designer handbags. While I'd been lying awake nights worrying about money, she'd been living off my son's generosity that had been meant for me. "There's more," Daniel said quietly, and something in his tone made my stomach clench. "I found emails, correspondence between Claudia and her sister, her friends. She's been bragging about it." He handed me printed copies of email exchanges. As I read them, I felt something cold and hard crystallize in my chest. "You should see how easy it is to manage Daniel's guilt about his mother." One email read, "I just mentioned how she's struggling, and he immediately wants to throw money at the problem. Of course, I make sure the money goes where it's actually needed, maintaining our lifestyle. His mother is surviving fine on her own. She's tougher than he thinks." Another email was even worse. "The old woman actually thinks Daniel doesn't care about her anymore. It's perfect. She's too proud to ask for help directly, and Daniel feels like he's doing his duty by sending money. Meanwhile, I get to enjoy the benefits without having to deal with a needy mother-in-law constantly asking for handouts." But the email that broke my heart was the most recent one, sent just 2 weeks before the Christmas party. "Daniel keeps talking about having his mother over for Christmas. I can't stand the thought of her in my house, judging everything, making Daniel feel guilty about our success. Maybe it's time to phase out the money transfers. She's managed this long without them, she obviously doesn't really need the help." I set the papers down with shaking hands. Daniel was watching me carefully, his face a mixture of rage and guilt and something that might have been fear. "Mom," he said softly, "I am so sorry. I trusted her completely. I thought I was taking care of you." I looked around my small living room at the furniture I bought secondhand 20 years ago. The carpet worn thin from use, the windows that needed replacing but that I couldn't afford to fix. Then I thought about Claudia's mansion with its marble countertops and crystal chandeliers, and rooms bigger than my entire house. "Where is she now?" I asked, At her sister's. She left right after the party, said she needed time to think. She hasn't been answering my calls. I nodded slowly. Of course she'd run. She knew exactly what she'd done, and she knew she'd been caught. The question was what she planned to do next: try to deny everything, blame me somehow, or attempt to manipulate Daniel into forgiving her. Daniel, I said carefully, I need you to understand something. This isn't just about the money. He frowned. What do you mean? She didn't just steal from me. She stole 3 years of your love, your concern, your care. You thought you were helping me, so you didn't worry about whether I was okay. You didn't call because you figured the money was enough. She made sure I felt abandoned by my own son, while she enjoyed the benefits of your generosity. Daniel's face crumpled, and for a moment he looked exactly like the little boy who used to cry in my arms after his father died. I abandoned you, he whispered. I let her convince me that sending money was the same as caring. You didn't know, I said. But even as I spoke the words, I felt the weight of all those lonely years, all those nights I'd wondered why my son never called, never visited, never seemed to care whether I was struggling. I should have known, Daniel said fiercely. I should have visited more, called more, paid attention. I should have seen that you were working yourself to death while my wife was living in luxury. We sat in silence for a long moment, both of us processing the magnitude of Claudia's betrayal. Finally, Daniel spoke again. What do you want me to do, Mom? I'll leave her. I'll make sure you get every penny back with interest. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. I looked at my son, really looked at him for the first time in years. Underneath the expensive clothes and successful exterior, I could see the guilt eating at him, the genuine horror at what his wife had done. But I could also see something else: a man who had become comfortable with the idea that money could solve problems, that financial support was equivalent to emotional care. I need time to think, I said finally, about what I want, about what's fair, about what comes next. Daniel nodded, gathering up the papers. Of course. Take all the time you need. And Mom, I'm going to make this right. I promise. After he left, I sat alone in my small living room, surrounded by the evidence of Claudia's deception. But I wasn't thinking about the money anymore, or even about the betrayal. I was thinking about power, and how completely I'd given mine away without even realizing it. For the first time in years, I was thinking about what I wanted instead of what everyone else needed from me. And what I wanted was something Claudia had never considered possible. I wanted to win. 2 weeks had passed since Daniel's revelation about the fake bank account, and I'd been doing my own investigating. At 65, I might not have understood computers the way my son did, but I understood people and I understood records. Years of managing household finances on a shoestring budget had taught me to pay attention to details others might miss. I was sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of tea, surrounded by papers I'd requested from the bank, when my phone rang. Daniel's number flashed on the screen, and something in the urgency of the ring told me this wasn't going to be a pleasant conversation. Mom, his voice was strained, exhausted. We need to talk. Can I come over? Of course, sweetheart. 20 minutes later, Daniel stood at my door looking worse than I'd ever seen him. His face was haggard, his clothes rumpled, and there was a defeated quality to his posture that reminded me of the day his father died. Behind him stood a woman I didn't recognize, middle-aged, professional-looking, carrying a briefcase. Mom, this is Rebecca Thompson. She's a forensic accountant. I hired her to dig deeper into Claudia's finances. Daniel's voice was flat, emotionless. What she found? It's worse than we thought. Rebecca shook my hand with a firm grip, her expression sympathetic but businesslike. Mrs. Crawford, may we sit down? What I need to share with you is quite extensive. We settled around my small dining table, and Rebecca opened her briefcase, pulling out folders thick with documents. Mrs. Crawford, when your son first contacted me, I thought we were dealing with a simple case of financial deception, a wife intercepting money intended for her mother-in-law. But this goes much deeper. She spread out bank statements, credit reports, and what looked like legal documents. Your daughter-in-law didn't just steal the money your son was sending you. She's been systematically manipulating your son's entire financial picture for years. Daniel leaned forward, His hands clasped tightly together. Mom, she's been lying about everything. The house, the cars, the lifestyle, it's all been funded by money she claimed was being spent on various family needs, including money she said was for you. I don't understand, I said, though a cold dread was beginning to settle in my stomach. Rebecca pointed to a series of transactions on one of the statements. Your son has been incredibly generous over the years, Mrs. Crawford. Not just the $5,000 a month that was supposed to go to you, but additional money for what Claudia claimed were your medical emergencies, home repairs, car troubles, crisis after crisis that required immediate financial assistance. I felt the blood drain from my face. What medical emergencies? What home repairs? Exactly, Rebecca said grimly. In the past 3 years alone, Claudia claimed you needed $47,000 for various emergencies: a roof replacement after storm damage that supposedly devastated your house, emergency surgery that your insurance didn't cover, a car accident that left you unable to work for months. Daniel's voice was barely a whisper. I thought I was helping you through crisis after crisis. Every time I'd start to worry about visiting you or wonder why you never called to thank me, Claudia would tell me you were too proud, too embarrassed about needing help. She told me you specifically asked that I not visit during these difficult times, that you were depressed about your financial situation, and didn't want me to see you struggling. I stared at the papers, trying to process the magnitude of what I was hearing. Not only had Claudia stolen the monthly support Daniel thought he was providing, but she'd invented emergencies, created fictional crises, all to extract even more money while ensuring that Daniel stayed away from me. How much? I asked quietly. Rebecca consulted her notes. Including the monthly payments and the emergency funds, approximately $230,000 over 3 years. The number hung in the air like a physical weight. $230,000. More money than I'd earned in the last 6 years combined. Money that could have allowed me to retire, to live comfortably, to stop working 2 jobs at an age when I should have been enjoying my golden years. But there's more, Rebecca said, and I wasn't sure I could handle any more revelations. Mrs. Crawford, are you familiar with your late husband's family property, the land his grandfather left him? I frowned. You mean the old property upstate? Michael inherited it from his grandfather, but we never did anything with it. It was just wild land, trees, and a creek. After Michael died, I couldn't afford to pay the property taxes, so I assumed it had been sold for taxes years ago. Daniel and Rebecca exchanged a look that made my stomach clench. Mrs. Crawford, Rebecca said carefully, that property was never sold for taxes. Your daughter-in-law has been paying the taxes on it for 3 years. She also commissioned a land survey and an environmental assessment. Why would she do that? I asked, though something deep in my gut already knew the answer wouldn't be good. Because the state is planning a new highway expansion, and that property is directly in the path of development. The government will be forced to purchase it through eminent domain, and the compensation estimate is between $1.2 and $1.8 million. The room started to spin. I gripped the edge of the table, trying to process what I was hearing. Are you telling me that land is worth over $1 million? Yes, ma'am. And legally, as your late husband's widow, you're the rightful owner. But Claudia has been positioning herself to claim ownership by virtue of the fact that she's been paying the taxes and maintaining the property. Daniel's face was white as paper. She's been planning this for years, Mom. The whole time she was stealing from you, making you struggle, keeping me away from you. She was positioning herself to steal your inheritance too. I thought about all the times I wondered what had happened to that old property, all the times I'd felt guilty about letting it go. Michael had loved that land. His grandfather had cleared it by hand, built a small cabin there that had long since fallen down. I'd always meant to visit it, to see if there was anything salvageable, but I'd never had the time or money for such a trip. She's been going there, Rebecca continued, maintaining the access road, clearing brush, even having the old foundation surveyed. She's created a paper trail that suggests she's been the property's caretaker for years. Can she really steal it from me? Not if we act quickly, Rebecca said. But she's been clever about creating documentation that could support a claim of adverse possession. If this had gone on much longer, She might have been able to make a legal case for ownership. I sat back in my chair, overwhelmed by the scope of Claudia's deception. This wasn't just about stealing money or manipulating my relationship with my son. She had been systematically planning to steal my husband's legacy, the one thing of real value he'd left behind. "There's one more thing," Rebecca said, and her voice was even more careful now. "Mrs. Crawford, we found evidence that Claudia has been researching your health insurance, your medical history, your life expectancy." Daniel made a sound like he'd been punched. "What kind of research?" "The kind someone does when they're planning for future inheritance issues," Rebecca said delicately. The implication hit me like a cold wind. Claudia hadn't just been stealing from me and planning to steal my property. She'd been calculating how much longer I might live, planning for what she could claim after I was gone. I looked at my son, this successful man who'd thought he was taking care of his mother while his wife systematically destroyed me. His face was crumpled with grief and rage and something that looked like horror at his own blindness. "Daniel," I said quietly, "I need you to understand something. This isn't your fault." He started to protest, but I held up my hand. "Your wife is a predator. She identified you as someone with money and a generous heart, and she exploited that. She identified me as someone with assets and few protections, and she exploited that too. This was a long-term plan executed with incredible patience and cunning." "But I should have seen it," Daniel said, his voice breaking. "I should have visited more, called more, paid attention to what was really happening with you." "Yes," I said simply, "you should have. But that doesn't make you responsible for her crimes." We sat in silence for a moment, all of us processing the enormity of what Claudia had done. Finally, Rebecca spoke. "Mrs. Crawford, what would you like to do with this information? We have enough evidence to pursue criminal charges, civil recovery, and to secure your legal claim to the property. But these decisions are ultimately yours to make." I looked at the papers spread across my table, evidence of the most comprehensive betrayal I could have imagined. Then I looked at my son, who was watching me with desperate hope and terrible guilt. "I need time to think," I said. "But Rebecca, I want you to do whatever is necessary to secure my legal claim to that property immediately today if possible." "Of course." After they left, I walked through my small house, seeing it differently now. This wasn't just my humble home. Anymore, it was evidence of how successfully I'd been victimized. Every worn piece of furniture, every outdated appliance, every sign of my years of struggle stood as testimony to Claudia's cruelty. But I was done being a victim. For the first time in years, I had power and I intended to use it. 3 days after Rebecca's devastating revelations, Daniel called me early in the morning. His voice was tight with barely controlled emotion. "Mom, Claudia's back. She wants to meet with all of us. She says she can explain everything." I was sitting at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd learned the scope of my daughter-in-law's betrayal, holding a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. In front of me were the legal documents. Rebecca had rushed through official papers confirming my ownership of Michael's family property, along with a preliminary estimate of its value, $1.6 million. "Where does she want to meet?" "At the house. She says it's her home too, and she has a right to discuss this on familiar ground." Of course she did. Even in defeat, Claudia wanted the advantage of her territory, surrounded by the luxury she'd purchased with stolen money. But I was done letting other people control the terms of my life. "No," I said firmly. "If she wants to talk, we meet at Rebecca's office with lawyers present. This isn't a family discussion anymore, Daniel. This is a legal matter." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "She's not going to like that." "I don't care what she likes." 2 hours later, I sat in Rebecca's conference room wearing my best dress, the same navy blue one I'd worn to the Christmas party. But somehow it felt different on me now, more like armor than apology. Daniel sat beside me, his lawyer on his other side. Across the polished table sat Claudia and her attorney, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit who kept checking his phone. Claudia looked terrible. Her usually perfect blonde hair was unkempt. Her makeup couldn't hide the dark circles under her eyes, and her designer clothes seemed to hang on her like costume pieces on the wrong actor. But when our eyes met across the table, I saw that the calculation was still there, the sense that she was working an angle even now. Helen, she began, her voice soft and apologetic. I know how this must look, but I need you to understand that everything I did was with the best intentions. Rebecca leaned forward slightly, her pen poised over a legal pad. Mrs. Crawford, I should inform you that this conversation is being recorded with everyone's consent, as indicated by the signed agreements. Claudia's lawyer nodded curtly. Claudia herself seemed to hesitate for just a moment before continuing. I was trying to protect Daniel from feeling guilty, she said, her eyes focused on me with what might have been genuine pleading. You're so independent, so proud. Every time he wanted to help you, you'd refuse. I thought if I managed the financial support discreetly, you could maintain your dignity while still getting the help you needed. I kept my expression neutral, but inside I felt familiar anger building. Even caught red-handed, she was still trying to manipulate the narrative. And the property taxes? Rebecca asked mildly. Were you paying those to protect Mrs. Crawford's dignity as well? Claudia's composure slipped slightly. I was protecting a family asset. Daniel is Michael's stepson, and when Helen passes away, that property would naturally. I'm not Michael's stepson, Daniel said sharply. Michael adopted me legally when I was 7. That makes me his son, not his stepson. And that property belongs to my mother, not to us. Claudia turned to him with the kind of desperate look I'd seen her use before when she needed to regain control. Honey, you're upset, and I understand that, but we need to think practically about the future. Your mother isn't getting any younger, and that property is going to require significant management when the state begins the acquisition process. Management that you were planning to provide? Rebecca asked. For a substantial fee, I assume? Claudia's lawyer placed a hand on her arm, but she ignored him. I was trying to ensure that Daniel's inheritance would be properly handled. Helen doesn't understand complex financial transactions. That was when something inside me snapped. Not into anger, but into perfect crystal clear certainty. Claudia, I said quietly, and my voice carried a calm authority that surprised even me. I want you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you. She turned to me, and for the first time since I'd known her, she looked genuinely uncertain. I've spent the last 3 days thinking about everything you've done. The stolen money, the fake emergencies, the lies you told my son to keep him away from me. The way you've been planning to steal my husband's legacy. I paused, letting the words settle in the room. But mostly, I've been thinking about how you made me feel for 3 years, how you made me believe that my own son didn't care about me. How you turned his love and generosity into weapons against both of us. Claudia's face was pale, but she was still trying to maintain that manipulative earnestness. Helen, I never meant for you to feel. You meant exactly that, I interrupted, and my voice was still calm, still controlled. You wanted me to feel abandoned and forgotten. You wanted Daniel to feel like he was doing his duty without having to actually connect with me. You orchestrated our separation because it served your purposes. I stood up, Rebecca's documents in my hands. Daniel, I said, turning to my son, you've offered to make this right, to give me back the stolen money, to leave Claudia and start over. Daniel nodded eagerly. Yes, Mom. Whatever you want. I don't want your money, I said, and I saw the shock on his face. I don't want you to leave your wife for me. I don't want you to upend your life to fix what she broke. Claudia's expression shifted to something that might have been hope, but I wasn't finished. I want something else entirely. I want you to make a choice, Daniel. A real choice based on who you want to be and what kind of life you want to live. I placed the property documents on the table in front of me. I'm going to be a wealthy woman very soon. This property that your wife tried to steal from me is worth more than $1.5 million. I don't need your money anymore, and I don't need your guilt. Daniel's face was a mixture of confusion and hope. What do you need, Mom? I need you to decide whether you want a relationship with me based on love and respect, or whether you want to continue living in a marriage built on lies and manipulation. I looked directly at Claudia, whose face had gone completely white. Because here's what's going to happen. I'm going to sell that property and use the money to live comfortably for the rest of my life. I'm going to quit both my jobs and move somewhere beautiful, somewhere I can finally rest. I gathered up my purse and stood to leave. And Claudia, I'm going to make sure that everyone, your friends, your family, your social circle knows exactly what kind of person you are. Not through some public campaign, but through careful, truthful conversations with people who matter to you. Claudia's lawyer was frantically scribbling notes, but Claudia herself looked like she might faint. But I'm not going to press criminal charges, I continued. And I'm not going to sue you for the money you stole. Do you know why? She shook her head mutely. Because the best revenge isn't destroying you. It's succeeding without you. It's living well while you live with the knowledge of what you've done. I turned back to Daniel one last time. Son, if you want a relationship with me, it has to be real. No more money transfers, no more guilt-driven gestures, just genuine care and respect between a mother and son who choose to be in each other's lives. Daniel stood up, his eyes bright with tears. I want that more than anything, Mom. Then you know what you need to do. I walked out of that conference room feeling lighter than I had in years. Behind me, I could hear Claudia's voice, high and desperate, trying to convince Daniel that I was being unreasonable, that she could change, that their marriage was worth saving. But I didn't turn around to see what he would choose. For the first time in my adult life, I was walking toward my own future instead of trying to fix someone else's problems. And it felt like freedom. 18 months later, I was sitting on the wraparound porch of my new house in Asheville, North Carolina, watching the morning mist rise from the Blue Ridge Mountains. The house wasn't enormous. I'd learned that happiness doesn't come from square footage, but it was mine, paid for in full with money from Michael's family property. Every morning I sat in this same spot with my coffee, marveling at the peace that comes from a life lived on your own terms. The state had purchased the property for $1.7 million. Even more than Rebecca's initial estimate. After taxes and legal fees, I'd netted enough to buy this house, set up a comfortable retirement fund, and still have money left over for the kind of life I'd never imagined possible. My phone buzzed on the table beside me, a text from Daniel. We'd developed a routine over the past year, communicating regularly but naturally, without the forced guilt or obligation that had characterized our relationship for so long. Good morning, Mom. Hope you're enjoying the beautiful weather. Jessica and I are driving down this weekend if you're free for dinner. Jessica, Daniel's new girlfriend. A kind woman who worked as a nurse and treated me like a person rather than an obligation. She was nothing like Claudia, warm where Claudia had been cold, genuine where Claudia had been calculating. The first time Daniel brought her to visit, I'd watched her carefully, looking for signs of the same manipulative charm that had fooled my son before. Instead, I'd found a woman who listened when I talked, who asked about my life with genuine interest, who helped with dishes not because she was performing the role of a good daughter-in-law, but because that's who she was. I texted back, I'd love that. I'll make my famous pot roast. It had taken Daniel 6 months to leave Claudia after that meeting in Rebecca's office. 6 months of trying to salvage something from a marriage built on lies, of couples therapy sessions where Claudia alternated between tearful apologies and angry accusations. I'd stayed out of it completely, focusing on my own life for the first time in decades. When Daniel finally called to tell me he'd filed for divorce, his voice had been exhausted but relieved. She fought me on everything, Mom. The house, the cars, even tried to claim she deserved part of your property settlement because she'd managed the family finances for years. Claudia had gotten nothing in the divorce except what the law required: half of the assets that were genuinely Daniel's, none of the money she'd stolen from me, and certainly none of my property settlement. Her lawyer had tried to argue that she deserved compensation for the care management she'd provided, but Rebecca had dismantled that argument with cold efficiency. The last I'd heard, Claudia was living in a small apartment across town, working as a receptionist at a dental office. Not the dramatic downfall some people might have wanted, but a quiet reduction to the kind of ordinary life she'd always disdained. Daniel occasionally mentioned seeing her around town, looking older and harder, but they never spoke. I'd kept my promise about not pressing criminal charges, but I'd also kept my promise about making sure people knew who she really was, not through any dramatic confrontation or public exposure, but through the kind of careful, truthful conversations that matter in a small community. When her friends asked why Daniel had left her, I simply told them the truth when asked. When people wondered why she'd moved out of the mansion, I explained about the stolen money and forged documents. The truth, it turned out, was more powerful than any revenge I could have planned. My neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, emerged from her own house next door, waving as she headed to her garden. She was 82, a widow like me, and over the past year she'd become the kind of friend I'd never had time for when I was working 2 jobs and worrying about money. We shared recipes, watched old movies together, and sometimes just sat on our respective porches in comfortable silence. "Morning, Helen," she called. "Coffee smells especially good today, doesn't it?" "Perfect weather for it," I called back, and marveled again at how such simple pleasures had become precious to me. I'd quit both my jobs the day the property sale was finalized. Walking out of that grocery store for the last time, hanging up my cashier's vest, had felt like shedding a skin I'd outgrown years ago. The cleaning job had been even easier to leave. I'd simply called the company and told them I was retiring. Retirement. At 66, I was finally doing what most people did in their 60s, enjoying the fruits of a lifetime of work, spending time on hobbies and relationships instead of survival. I'd taken up painting, something I'd always wanted to try but never had time for. My small studio was set up in what had been intended as a formal dining room, easel positioned to catch the mountain light. I wasn't particularly good at it, but that wasn't the point. The point was having time to be bad at something new, time to improve slowly, time to create something just for the joy of creation. My phone rang, interrupting my peaceful morning thoughts. Rebecca's name appeared on the screen. "Good morning, Rebecca. Please tell me this isn't about legal problems." Her laugh was warm. "Nothing like that, Helen. I'm calling with good news. Remember that class action lawsuit against the financial management company that Claudia used to hide your money? Of course. They've agreed to settle. The amount isn't huge, about $12,000 for you, but it's something. More importantly, the company has agreed to implement new safeguards to prevent this kind of fraud in the future. $12,000 wouldn't change my life, but knowing that other families might be protected from what I'd experienced felt like a victory of a different sort. That's wonderful news, I said. There's something else, Rebecca continued. I've been contacted by a legal aid organization. They're seeing more cases like yours, adult children's spouses manipulating family finances, isolating elderly parents, that sort of thing. They'd like to talk to you about sharing your story, maybe helping develop resources for other families. I considered this carefully. A year ago, the thought of making my private pain public would have terrified me. But now, with the security of financial independence and the clarity that comes from having survived betrayal, it felt like an opportunity to transform my experience into something useful. I'd be interested in hearing more about that, I said. After Rebecca hung up, I remained on my porch, thinking about the strange journey that had brought me to this place. The betrayal that had devastated me had also ultimately freed me. The son I'd thought I'd lost had found his way back to me, not through guilt or obligation, but through genuine choice. The money I'd never known I had given me not just financial security, but the power to shape my own life. Daniel's car pulled into my driveway just as I was finishing my second cup of coffee. He got out alone. Jessica must have stayed behind to handle some work obligations, and walked toward me with the easy gait of a man who'd shed a significant burden. "Morning, Mom," he said, settling into the chair beside mine. "Jessica sends her apologies. She got called in for an emergency at the hospital, but promises to make it up to you next weekend." "She doesn't need to make up anything," I said. "I like that she takes her job seriously." We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, both of us looking out at the mountains. Finally, Daniel spoke. "I've been thinking about Dad lately, about what he would have thought of all this." I smiled. "He would have been proud of how you handled it once you understood what was happening. And he would have loved knowing that his grandfather's land finally provided for his family, the way the old man always hoped it would. Do you think he would have seen through Claudia sooner than I did?" It was a question Daniel had asked in various forms over the past year, and I understood the guilt that drove it. But I'd also learned something about forgiveness, not the kind you give to others, but the kind you give to yourself. "Your father was a good man, but he wasn't magic, sweetheart. Smart people get fooled by manipulative people every day. The important thing is that you figured it out eventually and made the right choice. Daniel nodded, but I could see he was still carrying some of that weight. Daniel, I said, I need you to understand something. What happened with Claudia wasn't your fault, but more importantly, it wasn't a waste. Those 3 years of separation, of misunderstanding, they taught us both something valuable. He turned to look at me. What's that? They taught us that our relationship can't be based on duty or guilt or obligation. It has to be based on choice. Every conversation we have now, every visit, every text message, it's because we want to be in each other's lives, not because we feel we have to be. Daniel's eyes were bright with tears. I do want to be in your life, Mom. Not because I feel guilty about the past, but because I genuinely like the person you are. I like sitting here talking with you. I like hearing about your painting classes and your neighbor friends. I like that you're finally living the life you deserve. And I like the man you've become, I said. Not just the successful businessman, though I'm proud of that too. I like the person who was brave enough to leave a marriage that was killing his soul. I like the person who chose honesty over comfort. We sat quietly for a while longer, and I thought about the strange mathematics of loss and gain. I'd lost 3 years of my son's presence, a significant amount of money, and the illusion that family loyalty was automatic. But I'd gained financial independence, genuine peace, and a relationship with Daniel that was deeper and more honest than anything we'd had before. As the morning sun climbed higher over the mountains, I felt the kind of contentment I'd never experienced before. Not the desperate gratitude of someone who'd been given unexpected kindness, but the solid satisfaction of someone who'd fought for what they deserved and won. I was 67 years old, financially secure, surrounded by people who chose to love me rather than people who felt obligated to tolerate me. I had time to paint badly, time to drink coffee slowly, time to watch the seasons change from my own front porch. It had taken me nearly 7 decades to learn that the best revenge against those who try to diminish you isn't destruction or punishment. It's living so well that their betrayal becomes irrelevant. And for the first time in my life, I was doing exactly that. What would you have done in my situation? Have you ever experienced something similar in your own family? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing to hear more stories like this one.